pjnet.tv, 9 o'clock on the East Coast. It is time for PJNet Live, and we are running the bumper. We are recording. We are streaming. We have our guest waiting, and we have people in the chat room waiting. So let's switch. Studio 8 in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Well, good evening and welcome to PJNet.tv. I'm your host, Coach Prasick, and it is my honor to sit in this place and have a good time. If you are here in the PJNet.tv, I know you're having good fellowship and a good time. If you are watching this on Facebook, on Twitter, or on YouTube, thank you for taking some of your time to join with us, but we also invite you to join the chat fellowship. It's at pjnet.tv. Get it? It's right there. It's over there. You can't forget it. It's right there. You'll meet some great friends over there. It's the sweetest fellowship on the internet. I've been told that repeatedly by one of the voices in my head. Folks, we have a returning guest standing by to share with us. Now, I will own this because it is my fault. When she appeared the first time, we got bogged down, and you know how I do. We chased some rabbits, but we never got around to talking to something that is very personal to her and to me. Folks, I am looking forward. Norma Gail is with us, and Norma Gail, thanks for putting up with me last time. and
I enjoyed last time.
We did have a good time. I guess time just kind of ran out, and but there is something near and dear to your heart and to mine that is a topic that is not talked about very much. It's a topic that is very sensitive. It's a topic that is very personal. And it's a topic that there's a lot of ignorance and misunderstanding out there. Tell us, what is that deep secret? And it's not a secret really, but what is that influence on your mind? Adoption.
To me, adoption means joy, because adoption brought me my 2 kids and years and years of blessing, and seeing 2 tiny little people become, in our case now, responsible Christian adults, and to know that we had a hand in that, and that perhaps had they not been placed in our home, they might never have even had the opportunity to know the Lord. And it's just mind-boggling to think that the Lord could have picked those 2 children out and picked them out specifically for us before we had any idea that they would be ours, and provided this incredible opportunity for us and this huge blessing.
Well, it's a touchy subject, okay? Because and by the way, JD in our chat room is also adopted. Coach Prasick is also adopted, and we adopted our daughter Shelby. Now, it is a deeply personal subject because the first behind the scene, the backdrop to the subject of adoption is the subject of infertility.
Very true.
Usually. Okay.
Usually.
Some people adopt later in life after they've had children, but for many couples, before you can consider adoption, you have to deal with, and I don't think for men it's that big of a deal, or it certainly wasn't for me, but I think for women, motherhood is a central part of their very being.
I think that's true for most women.
So the first struggle.
It really is. And it certainly was for me. My husband said he finally sort of got an inkling of what it meant to me to not be able to give birth to a child after trying for years and years, when he lost a job and was without work for months and months and could not support his family. And he said that was probably the closest he would ever come to understanding what I felt, because that was something he, as a man, was supposed to do.
Mm-hmm. And it is gut-wrenching, but at least in the case of long-term unemployment, it's a little bit easier to change your circumstances. When you're
That's
dealing
right.
with biology and things like that, that's a God thing, and
Yeah, totally.
it's tough. But so somewhere along the line, you have to reconcile that you come to that point that say we've got to go with Plan B, and this is part of the problem, folks. Is adoption is considered Plan B. Now, in the interim, okay, here we are, 30 something. Okay, been married since she was 18, I was 20. You get the most awkward situations. How do you cope? What were some of the things that you encountered with other people's insensitivities?
Let's see. We were married 8 years before we adopted. So on our fifth wedding anniversary, my father decided to ask when we were going to have grandchildren, because he just thought 5 years was a bit too long to wait. And my husband, who is pretty blunt, just looked him right in the face and said, well, Dad, we're still practicing, and when we get it right, we'll let you know. And my dad proceeded to turn every possible shade of red and never asked that question again.
Well, it is an insensitive question because, I mean, no matter what answer what do you think is going to happen here? I mean, I would cope with it with humor. Okay, a lot of times in church, they would say, "Well, when's a little?" I would say, "You know what? I'm involved in teaching your children, and after observing them, I've decided children are not a good idea."
I would usually cry. We had a woman who was a friend of my husband's family suggest, and this was 40 years ago, suggest that there might be a young woman at the university that would be willing to have a child for us with my husband, and then it would be half ours. And I let her know that that was certainly not in our way of thinking. We were comfortable with our plans and ran as fast as I could away from that situation, literally. But it's also a very politically incorrect topic in these days. There are a lot of people who think that to place a child for adoption is doing something wrong. I've had people actually say to me they would rather have an abortion than place a child for adoption, because they think at least that they think they have no way of guaranteeing. And there is some degree of truth, and probably they're not coming from any strong faith, but they had no way of guaranteeing that child would be going into a good home. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a little bit of misunderstanding as far as all the hoops you have to jump through to adopt. If biological parents had to jump through all of those hoops, there would be far less children in difficult situations, because a lot of people just wouldn't be able to have children if they had to go through all the things that you have to adopt.
You took the words right out of my mouth, because when we finally got to the point of reconciliation, saying, we're going to adopt, first of all, we didn't know the waiting period would be 8 years. And they don't tell you that. That's for certain. So much has changed, because I was adopted, and back in those days, 1959, the records were like sealed. I mean, there was no way.
Yes.
Now, yes. I actually have well, you're not adopted yourself, but have your adopted children ever expressed an interest in finding their birth mother?
My children have not. I wish they would, actually. I would like to meet their birth mothers and give them a big hug and say thank you. But my children actually have zero desire to meet their birth mothers. We stayed in communication with them for the first 21 years of their lives. I did the communicating. I wrote the letters, and I would let them write a little note, draw a picture, whatever they wanted to do, if that was what they wanted to do. I turned it over to them when they turned 21 because I felt like my job was done. It was their time to take that over. And they both let that go by the wayside, which I think is really very sad, probably for their birth mothers too, who were always very willing to say how grateful they were for having pictures and letters. So I think that's kind of sad, but it's just something that my kids don't feel they need in their lives. And they're 34 and 36 now.
I never had any desire to find my birth mother. I never thought of my parents as anything less than or other than my parents. I was adopted at birth. Things were very different back then. Because when I got to school age and began to visit doctors, okay, for whatever reason, you will get asked standard questions that make a lot of sense. And they would say things like, is there any history of, heart disease or blah, blah, blah in your family history? And my answer was, don't know.
Yeah.
I could be at risk for a lot of things if I only knew. Maybe we could.
That's very true.
And I don't think people ever give that a thought. So one of the things, and adoption has changed so much. First of all, you have to turn in a dossier. I mean, not a resume, a dossier.
Literally.
Yeah. A dossier detailing every, and they do, I won't call it a background check, but for lack of a better word, we'll just call it that.
Actually, they do a background check. We were fingerprinted and everything.
Yeah. They put you through the ringer. And what you just said earlier, you nailed it. You said it in a little different way than I would say it. But literally, if birth parents had to go through the same regimen of the same battery of testing that adoptive parents, there would be less babies.
There would be.
If you had to get a permit to have a baby in the same way you would adopt a child, no, it wouldn't happen. It is also expensive.
Yes, it is. I know people that have spent years raising the money through garage sales and all kinds of things in order to help raise some of the money to pay for the adoption expenses.
Now, there's a lot of ways to go about this, but I'll share my experience. We went to an organization called the Children's Home Society. It's a nonprofit organization. We elected not to use an attorney. Now, we were counseled. I mean, we've got church people, members of our church, friends of ours that are attorneys, saying, I can help you with this. And it's like, I just didn't feel that a child being brought into your life is a transaction.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that is not to say that others that do it that way have chosen wrongly. For my wife and I, we could not fathom the idea of a contract, surrounding this. Yeah. So we went to the Children's Home Society. Now, they do some things right, in my opinion. First of all, when a birth mother comes to them, the first thing they do is get the mother declared incompetent by the law. Mm-hmm. You see, she can't change her mind.
That's
She's not.
Interesting.
Okay.
Because ours could have changed their mind at any point up until the time that the adoption was finalized in court.
They get the court to declare the birth mother incompetent so that there is no getting out of this. Furthermore, what they do, some of the money that you give them, part of their fee, they then house the mother, provide housing for the mother, either through stipend or by literally providing the housing. They have a required regimen of prenatal visits to the doctor. They adopt that mother, so to speak. to help underwrite or help ensure the prenatal good health of that child. Now,
Both of the agencies that we went through, which were both Christian agencies, by the way, both of them did that also. They supported the mother financially and medically, however they possibly could. And in the case of our son, his birth mother actually lived in the maternity home that was part of the adoption agency during the time that she was pregnant.
same kind
And
of
she was
setup.
not a young woman. She was 25 years old. She was not a teenage mother.
Now, the
But
other
she chose
interesting
to
thing
live there.
is, we have a lot of interaction. I mean, we have to go to this interview. All right, you get your little dossier. They literally have a ring binder of prospective parents. I kid you, you can't make this stuff up. And of course, you've got to put pictures in with your dog, and all these happy times. And,
Your house.
you're competing. You are competing with other adoptive parents.
Yes.
And we waited and we waited and we waited. And it literally was 8 years. Now, one of the things is we have our own little check boxes, requirements. Okay. Basically, our goal was to adopt the same kind of child we would have conceived normally. Okay. Same race. We didn't care if it was male or female, because when you don't get to make that choice, and we agreed, once we made arrangements, that this is that we would take that baby no matter what. We couldn't bail out either. The mother couldn't, or we couldn't. Now, the interesting thing, the birth mother had been pregnant several times and had aborted several babies. And the adoption agency told us that sometimes adoption is some kind of moral countermeasure to kind of even the score. Well, I aborted one, I'm going to adopt one. That somehow that evens it out. But I remember so well that the mother of the birth mother was a wonderful woman, and she pretty much orchestrated the whole thing. She was a devout Mormon. And, I have my opinions and theological differences with Mormons, but I tell you what, they're good people. You got to give them that.
Well, yes.
Their standards are high. And this woman was very helpful in the entire situation, and I'll never forget that moment. You go to the hospital, and it's funny because the first 24 hours we couldn't actually hold the baby, because they got to let the mother, whatever. And, we were anxious, but the time came for her to give that baby over to our arms, from her arms to ours. That was a very intense moment.
Now, we did not have that.
Yeah, I mean, it was very dramatic, I should say. And I remember so well that Mormon mother, grandmother, or whatever, said, "Mark, would you just lead us in prayer? And when you say amen, we will keep our eyes closed. And you all will walk out." I get chills just thinking about it, but
I couldn't have seen to walk out. I would have been crying so hard.
Well, it was tough, but it all worked out, and I think that if there's anything that I would hope to share, that anybody that sees or hears this would know that God has a plan, and don't get out ahead of God. Okay, God has a plan for your life. Now, that plan may be a baby. It may be adoption. But let God rule.
We actually, go ahead, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
We actually had discussed adoption before we got married. Because I was a nursing student, so I had seen abortions take place, and I knew I was very opposed to that. I grew up with a lot of kids that were adopted, and they were wonderful families. And we got married in the mid 70s. That was the, what was it? Zero population generation, where,
Remember
just replace
bomb?
yourselves, but don't add to it. And so my husband wanted 4 kids. I kind of only wanted 2. And we talked about having 2 and adopting 2. And the having 2 just didn't work out. But we had discussed it prior. And that to me shows that God was already preparing our hearts for those kids. 8, 10 years, because we were engaged for 2 years, 8 to 10 years before those kids came along, God was preparing our hearts.
About halfway into the process, the adoption agency calls, ring, ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling, and say, listen, there's another option here. And they literally had a class where prospective adoptive parents were. We were all sitting in this class, and they start telling us how you can get a Chinese female baby on the fly, man. Just the Chinese government is handing over babies like crazy, because I won't go into the politics of the matter, but my wife and I just looked at each other. What are we doing here? This was not what we thought of. And the other thing that really it really grieves my spirit is I see all these abortions, and yet I know myself, and I know so many others that have waited years and years and years to adopt.
Oh, I know people that would have loved to adopt, but either financially it was impossible, or there just were not enough children available.
Yeah.
Because so many kids, if they're older kids, there's either problems of some sort that some people don't feel comfortable in handling, or sometimes they're not free for adoption because for whatever reason the parental rights have not been terminated for one reason or another, and they can't be adopted, and they're stuck in the foster care system. And it's just so sad that there are children out there that don't have permanent homes, when there are so many loving parents, families, potential parents, that would love to have them. Both days that we brought our kids home were just some of the most incredible days. I can't even describe what a joyful experience that was. What an incredible thing it was to bring that baby home. And we had to fly, we're outside of Albuquerque, we had to fly to San Antonio, Texas for our son. And so we had a couple, and that wasn't a direct flight. Back in 1984, we had to fly to Dallas and then fly to San Antonio. And the day we brought him home, there were thunderstorms that delayed us on the way. And then we were in the Dallas airport when Braniff Airlines went bankrupt. And everybody was scrambling for flights. And we were thinking, are we ever even going to get there to pick up this baby? We got there, we got him, we got back to the airport, and everything was delayed again. And it was very late at night, and people were grouchy and grumpy, and they're not always real anxious to sit next to people with it. He was 3 weeks old, not too anxious to sit next to a baby of that size, and a couple of people were saying things and making faces and stuff. He converted him pretty quickly, because he just didn't lay there and sleep. He kept his eyes open, and those legs and arms were going. And I swear that little guy knew exactly that at that moment his life had changed, that something big had, because what newborn, what 3-week-old can stay awake and not be screaming all the way from San Antonio to Albuquerque with delays in the airports? And he didn't make a peep. He just looked at everybody and kept those legs and arms churning, and he was just content. And he just acted like he knew something big was happening. It was pretty amazing.
Well, that would not have happened in my case, because again, the mother is declared incompetent. The child then becomes a ward of the state of Florida. Okay, and the adoption agency is the custodian of that child, and then they release that custody in a stewardship contract with the adoptive parents. So for the first month or so, that's not our child. And we literally would have to contact the adoption agency. We live right near the Georgia border. So every Sunday afternoon, we would go from Monticello, Florida. It's about a 20-mile trip to Thomasville, Georgia, to eat out, after church.
Mm-hmm.
I would have to call. And of course, all I could do is leave a message. But I would literally have to notify them that I am taking this child out of the state of Florida.
Oh, wow.
It
Interesting.
wasn't that it wasn't permitted, but I had to let them know. I had to put them on notice. And because we were literally just the custodian until the court date was set and all the court stuff happened, at which point we were legally their parents and we got a birth certificate and all that kind of stuff. But there are so many twists and turns. But I just wanted to share with you all, please, be sensitive. Please be sensitive to young couples that have been married a few years and don't have children. They might be electing not to have them, but don't assume that, please. It does hurt when you ask really stupid and insincere questions. And I don't think anybody meant to, it does. And nobody thinks about it in clutch the mouth until you can get the brain in gear, okay?
I quit going to baby showers. I would make sure I delivered a gift to the hostess of the shower ahead of time, but I quit going to baby showers because it just got too difficult. After 4 years of waiting, it was just too painful to wait.
Right. And if you are a single mother, I don't care what the circumstances are, but just know that God has a plan for that child. And if you're not able, abortion is not the option. That is not an option.
It is not.
It is not an option. Folks, there are a multitude of alternatives that are not only good, but would bring joy. Sheer joy. JD is probably yielding some of his time. Thank you, JD. He's always very gracious. Norma, I'm glad that we met up, and intersected, because this is a topic that doesn't get much attention. And let me give you the
really
final
doesn't.
word. We got to make room for JD, but give me your final words and let's call it a night.
Well, I just thank you for opening up the opportunity to talk about it, because we never know. Someone might have an opportunity to speak to a young woman who's trying to decide what to do, and suggest that adoption would be the loving option for her child.
It has worked out well for me in my own life and with my own daughter. And it's never the first choice. Come on. but at the same time, God has a plan, folks. Jeremiah 29:11 says so.
And his plans are always good.
They are plans to prosper us, not to harm us. Plans to give us hope and a future. Folks, that is either true or it's not. If it is true, we need to live by it. Let's decide. Norma, thank you for sharing on such a difficult and sensitive topic. The joy in your face, the countenance of your face radiates the joy that I know that we have as adoptive parents. So thank you for sharing with us.
Yes.
It's been wonderful. Appreciate it, girl.
Thank you.
All right. JD, thanks JD for waiting. Folks, JD is always so gracious, and we will bring JD to take us on a trip around the Cross W. We are going to talk branding, and I can't think of a more interesting topic for us. I say us. You're my family. We're all authors. I just hadn't written anything and never will, okay? But that'll be coming up in just a few moments. I'll leave you with two questions. I think they're very important. The first question is this. Think of the single most bold thing you have ever done for Jesus Christ. I hope it doesn't take you too long to think of that. The second question is this. How long ago was that? If we are going to carry out the Great Commission, make disciples, as we are commanded to do, and called to do, and equipped to do, may we never be satisfied with either answer.